So far, we've taken a look at unemployment in the macroeconomic economy. Now let's have a look at inflation. What is inflation? Well, inflation is a general rise in the level of prices of all goods. So what does that do? It decreases the purchasing power of your money. So inflation is seen in South Africa by the Consumer Price Index. As I've spoken in that example before, we take a basket of goods, we give them each weights according to how much we think people use those goods, and we see those changes in the prices. Note that some goods may increase price, some goods may decrease price, but there might still be an overall increase in the price of goods, and so there would be inflation in the economy. Now, there are two types of inflation in the economy. You can either have demand pull inflation or cost push inflation. Demand pull inflation occurs when there is an excess amount of spending over the total amount of production in the economy. So people have got an increase in demand for all the types of goods, and they spend so much on the goods that it increases the demand further, but suppliers can't increase supply even further because they've already stretched to the maximum of their capacity. Now, when there's still increasing demand and there's suppliers have got to the maximum of their capacity, the only thing that can happen is there will be an increase in the price level. So demand pull inflation results in an increase in excess demand or excess spending, and suppliers aren't able to match that with an increase in supply. So it leads to an increase in prices. Note also that the Reserve Bank could increase the money supply, and when you increase the money supply, this will also lead to an increase in the price level. As I say, there's too much money chasing too few goods. Cost push inflation is the other type of inflation. This occurs when the per unit production costs in a firm increase. The per unit production cost can increase either by an increase in the resource prices, so we've seen that with increases in the price of oil and increases in raw materials. Those firms have to buy those raw materials and use them to produce goods, but if the prices of those raw materials increase, then their per unit production costs will also increase, and they'll pass that on to consumers. So the prices of their final products will also have to increase so that they don't make a loss. This increase in the prices because of cost push inflation. It also can result in the decrease in the productivity of workers, where they're still being paid the same, but their productivity might decrease, so they aren't making as many goods per hour of labor, and so the costs involved in making that product will increase, and so it will be passed on to consumers in higher prices, and that's seen as cost push inflation. Now, what is the inflation situation in South Africa? Well, we have the Reserve Bank that needs to target inflation. They've been mandated by the government to target inflation between 3% and 6%. This isn't CPI, you and I know. It's consumer price inflation excluding mortgage payments. So they call it CPIX, excluding mortgage payments. They have to target that inflation between 3% and 6%. Now, why are they looking to target it in that range? Well, they're looking to target it there because if inflation was too high, as we've seen in places such as Zimbabwe, if inflation is too high and you have hyperinflation, it's going to decrease the purchasing power of individuals' money. So if you're a pensioner and you've saved all your money for years and years and years, and suddenly there's inflation of 100%, the value of that money will suddenly be worth nothing. So it's very bad for people such as pensioners, as well as when there's high inflation rates, businesses aren't able to make decisions on what their projects and what the return on their projects are going to be. So there's not going to be any investment in the country because the risk associated with what return you're going to get is extremely high. So even with inflation rates that are at 10%, 15%, those are too high because they decrease the purchasing power of your money by too much of an extent, and also makes it a very volatile environment for business. But what about 0% inflation? Why do we have inflation at all? Well, the problem with that is deflation. If you get to deflation, prices are going to decrease. If prices decrease, and you know that prices are going to decrease within 6 months, are you going to buy that new DVD player now? No, you're not. You're going to wait for 6 months' time when it's cheaper. But then in 6 months' time, if prices are still decreasing, are you going to buy the DVD player then? Probably not. So you're going to not buy any goods if you know the price is going to decrease. So consumption is going to fall through the floor, and there's not going to be any producers producing any output because that output isn't being sold. So the production in the economy is going to fall through the floor. It's going to do extremely badly. So deflation is a very scary impact, and it happened with Japan in the 90s, and they went through a very bad time where their real output decreased dramatically. So you want to try and keep it in between 3% and 6%. And that's what Tito Mboweni and his colleagues at the Reserve Bank try to do. And they do that by altering the interest rate, and we're going to go through how the interest rate can alter things such as consumption and investment further on in the course.